when, for example, we created the ships, we sent that to our researchers to have a look at, and they said, actually, the ships that you've created are wrong. And we were like, oh my God, how? And we had created ships with wooden planks and metal nails, and they were like, well, in China at the time we didn't use metal nails, we used dovetail joints. And so our artists had to go and remove every single nail from all of the ships and replace them with dovetail joints. And it was that level of detail that was so important to us, because ultimately we wanted to create a world in VR that really did feel like you were stepping back in time.
Sister, over here.
What news?
The Pirate Council will be assembling soon.
And only one of us will be crowned leader.
I learned about it because a friend of mine told me and said, did you know that the most powerful woman in history was a pirate? And I was like, this is unbelievable. I had no idea that anyone could have so much power. And when I started looking into it, I realized that Cheng Shi commanded 70,000 people during the lead up to the Opium Wars and became the most powerful pirate of all time. And I thought, I have to tell this story in some way. It's incredible. So we started developing it about 5 years ago now, which feels like a long time ago. And yeah, that's how it came about. It's funny because we actually started developing it as a film. So before the pandemic, we started out, and I teamed up with a company in Beijing called Seesaw Films, who made a film called The Farewell with Aquafina, which is an incredible, incredible film. And we started developing the Pirate Queen together, but when the pandemic hit, obviously no one knew what was going to happen with the film industry and the future of the industry. So at that point, I reached out to a friend of mine called Dr. Dave Ranyard, who used to be the head of PlayStation Studios in London. And I called Dave and I said, listen, I've been thinking about this, and what if we made the Pirate Queen into a game? It would be phenomenal. We could have an experience where you row through treacherous waters, you climb up the side of pirate ships, you navigate through moonlit caverns. Like, it would be a really, really exciting experience. And so from there we got some funding from Creative England, and we built a short VR game that we then showed at Raindance Film Festival, and we won at Raindance and then went on to get funded by Meta, and then the story went from there. So that was kind of the origin of it.
Generally, when people approach me, it's for something that is for something animated, let's say for voiceover, as well as something that has been created out of somebody's imagination or some kind of fuzzy animal. So for the first time, this was quite different for me, because VR is something that is worn as a headset, you know, and so it's much more intimate. And there's a quiet elegance that she has to bring, and as well as, because it's been narrowed down to that one night where she succeeds, there's a history behind it, and her personality has to really come through with her intellect, her cunning, her sense of humor. And so Eloise really understood what she wanted. I mean, obviously, having worked on a project for 5 years, you'd hope that they do, but sometimes, you know, when you go into voiceover, directors will have you do a variety of different takes, because they're not sure what's going to fit in, but she knew exactly what she wanted. And I think that was so refreshing, because you really had a confidence in that director as well as into the project, understanding that they really understood the voice before I even stepped into the room.
It would prove wise to stick to the shadows.
Gopalai underestimates me. He has played a foolish trick. One he will come to bitterly regret.
The first version, the short version of the game, was just one room, and the idea was that it was setting up the night that she was coming to power. And for us, the intention from the beginning was to create this world where you go through the journey of how she came to power and the night that she succeeded. So the short was literally that first room, the escape room, And then the rest of the game is the whole night. So you go to Guapodai's cabin, you try and poison him, you then try and outsmart the British, and then by the end of it you get crowned leader. So it went from being about a 30-minute experience to being a narrative that is between sort of 2 to 4 hours long. For us, the biggest challenge was definitely, one, the scope. So we had never made a VR game before, this is our debut. And when we first started, we created this game that was huge and probably would have taken us about 10 years to make. And we realized quite quickly that it wasn't achievable to put in all of these mechanics to create something that was so complicated. And so we really had to work out what our scope and remit was going to be to actually deliver something to Meta on time. And then the second challenge was definitely kind of the tech side of things, because again, for us as filmmakers, we know how to tell stories, and that's sort of our bread and butter, but to tell a story in VR was very, very new to us. And before I started this project, I literally had no idea what Unreal Engine was. I had absolutely no technical knowledge whatsoever, so it was a huge learning curve to learn all of these terms and phrases and work with game designers and developers and bring it to fruition.
I did struggle with the Cantonese because that's not my first language. Mandarin is, and so we had a really fun time learning it. The names and some of the gestures with, you know, the vocals, which was quite funny because there's a lot of different tones in Cantonese. And Andy Yu, who is the translator and also really coached me through that, was very funny, and I enjoyed that aspect of it because you really want it to be accurate, you know, so that was a wonderful challenge for me.
I think for us, we went into the project with the intention of making it as historically accurate and factually accurate as possible. And so Maya Bodenstein, our writer, is half German and half Chinese, and she specializes in telling culturally accurate stories. So she very much paved the way with ensuring that everything that we were doing was as accurate as we possibly could get it. And so we brought in sensitivity checkers and researchers and fact checkers to ensure that what we were creating was as true to the time as we possibly could get. So much so that when, for example, we created the ships, we sent that to our researchers to have a look at, and they said, actually, the ships that you've created are wrong. And we were like, oh my God, how? And we had created ships with wooden planks and metal nails, and they were like, well, in China at the time we didn't use metal nails, we used dovetail joints. And so our artists had to go and remove every single nail from all of the ships and replace them with dovetail joints. And it was that level of detail that was so important to us, because ultimately we wanted to create a world in VR that really did feel like you were stepping back in time.
I thought the production value in the game was so high, and the dovetail joints, all of those things that I didn't even know about, you kind of take it for granted, but I can't imagine how much. I was telling Eloise that when you play the game, it's almost like you can smell, all of your senses are illuminated in that time.
Everything has narrowed down to a single night. If you really want to know my story, then step into my shoes and prove yourself the worthy leader. Let's see how well you fare as the Pirate Queen.
There are a couple of lines, but there's one, and it's so small and incidental, but it's if you go and pick up dice at sort of near the end of the game, and Cheng Shi's character says dice, but I'm going to mess up the line. She says, dice, although I feel like we've gambled enough with fate tonight, or something like that. And it's just like it's a really nice line and really satisfying, because you're kind of reaching the end of the game and so many things have happened. And it's just, I don't know, I've always just loved that line.
It's kind of a little clue also, because after she retires and makes that deal with the government, she opens up, a gambling den.
She does, yeah.
So it's a little bit of a
little
kind
foreshadow.
Of an Easter egg sort of thing, yeah.
Yes, it is an Easter egg.
Maybe.
And there's a moment in the game that I really, really love, and I'm not going to give it away, but it's sort of towards the end of the sampan maze, which is these floating sampans that you have to navigate through, and it's just before you fight the British, and it's this sort of big cinematic moment that happens, and it's so emotive in VR, and everyone who plays the game responds the same way in sort of shock and awe when this happens. And it's a perfect example of why VR is such a beautiful medium to tell stories in. And we can see it all the time when people climb up the side of the ship or they look out into one of the vistas and people just say, oh my God, this is just so beautiful. And I think that's the beauty about VR and why it's so exciting to tell stories in VR, is that it is such an immersive format, and there's no other worlds that you can step into the shoes of a 19th century female pirate, which always just feels exciting to me. I think less than 10% of video games have female protagonists. And so the fact that we're creating this game about a woman and advocating it in VR as well, where you literally embody another person, that's really exciting. And it's a story about gender equality as well, and championing a woman who quite literally paved the way for men and women to be treated equally. So I'm so proud of our team for creating a game that has all of those values and messages and can really get behind a story that has been forgotten from history.